I drove back to my hometown, my heart pounding against my chest as I thought about the reunion that was about to happen. Right now, everyone was gathering for a memorial service marking 2 years since my supposed death. My brother James had convinced our entire town that I had died in a climbing accident in Peru. All this for the $1 million inheritance our grandparents left us. Trước khi tôi kể lại khoảnh khắc bước vào chính đám tang của mình, hãy cho tôi biết bạn đang xem từ đâu và nhấn subscribe để không bỏ lỡ những câu chuyện đáng kinh ngạc như thế này. Growing up, James and I had what I considered a perfect brotherhood. Despite being 3 years apart, we were inseparable. He was the protective older brother who always looked out for me, standing up to bullies at school who tried to mess with me. Our family was well off, thanks to our grandparents who owned a successful chain of traditional restaurants across Boston. Their recipes had been passed down for generations, and the business had thrived under their careful guidance. Our bond grew even stronger after our parents died in a car accident when I was 15 and James was 18. We only had each other and our grandparents to lean on during those dark days. James would sit with me during nights when nightmares about the accident kept me awake. He would tell me stories about adventures we would have once we were older, promising that we would always be there for each other. As we grew older, our paths began to diverge. I discovered my passion for photography during a high school art class. Something about capturing moments and emotions through a lens spoke to me on a level nothing else had before. My grandparents encouraged this artistic pursuit, buying me my first professional camera for my 18th birthday. They loved how I captured the essence of their restaurants, the food, and the people who worked there. James, on the other hand, followed the path that seemed predestined for him. After graduating with a business degree, he stepped in to help our grandparents run the family restaurants. He had a natural talent for it, expanding the business and bringing in modern marketing strategies that increased profits substantially. Our grandparents were proud of his business acumen, but there was something different about the way they spoke about my artistic endeavors. I started to notice a change in James whenever our grandparents praised my photography. His smile would tighten, and a flash of something dark would cross his eyes before quickly disappearing. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination. After all, James had always been my biggest supporter, but looking back, I should have paid more attention to those momentary lapses in his usual encouraging demeanor. The true turning point came on our grandfather's 80th birthday. After a grand celebration at the flagship restaurant, our grandparents announced they wanted to discuss their will with us. James looked excited, probably expecting to receive the lion's share of the inheritance due to his involvement in the business. I honestly did not care much about the money. I was making enough from my photography gigs to support my simple lifestyle. In the privacy of our grandparents' study, our grandmother opened a folder and cleared her throat. My grandfather placed his hand over hers as she spoke the words that would ultimately lead to my fake death. They had decided to split their entire estate equally between James and me, 50% each of the restaurant chain properties, investments, and cash. It amounted to several $1 million for each of us. The room fell silent after the announcement. I thanked them sincerely, but assured them I hoped it would be decades before any of this mattered. James, however, sat rigid in his chair. His face was composed, but I could see his knuckles turning white as he gripped the armrests. Later that night, he confronted me in the garden. He was not yelling, which somehow made it worse. In a cold, controlled voice, he explained how unfair the arrangement was. He had dedicated his life to the family business while I was off playing with cameras. He deserved more than half. I tried to reason with him, even offered to sign something, giving him operational control. But he walked away mid-conversation. A month later, James approached me with what seemed like an olive branch. He had arranged and would fully fund a world photography tour for me. Mexico, Peru, Brazil, Argentina, a full year of travel to build my portfolio. He had even arranged meetings with renowned photographers and gallery owners. I was stunned by his generosity and thought this meant he had come to terms with our grandparents' decision. How wrong I was. What I did not know then was that while booking my tickets and accommodations, James had also purchased a substantial life insurance policy on me, naming himself as the beneficiary. He had laid the groundwork for a plan so dark, I still struggle to comprehend it fully. My journey began in Mexico City, where the vibrant colors and rich culture provided endless inspiration for my camera. I spent 3 months there immersing myself in local traditions and capturing the essence of daily life. From there, I moved on to Peru, where the ancient ruins of Machu Picchu and the breathtaking Andean landscapes became my subjects. Throughout my travels, I maintained regular contact with my grandparents. However, James often acted as an intermediary, claiming they were busy with doctor appointments or taking short vacations. In hindsight, this should have raised red flags, but I trusted my brother implicitly. Why would I not? He was funding this incredible opportunity for me. My first gallery showing in Rio de Janeiro was a moderate success. I sold several prints and received positive reviews from local art critics. I called home immediately to share the news, but once again James answered and said our grandparents were out. He congratulated me half-heartedly and quickly changed the subject to ask about my next destination. The first truly concerning incident happened 6 months into my journey. I was in Lima preparing for a hiking expedition to photograph remote villages in the Andes. My credit card was declined when I tried to pay for specialized equipment. Thinking it was just a security measure due to international charges, I called the bank. They informed me the card had been reported lost and canceled. When I called James about this, he apologized profusely, claiming there must have been a mix-up and promised to wire money to my account. The money arrived, but I still could not access my regular bank account online. James explained it away as technical issues with international access and assured me everything was fine. I believed him because I had no reason not to. This pattern continued for several more months, strange financial issues, difficulty reaching our grandparents directly, and James always having a plausible explanation. 9 months into my trip, while exploring a small town outside Lima, I ran into Sarah Thompson, an old college friend who was backpacking through South America. Her reaction upon seeing me was not the joyful surprise I expected. She went pale as if seeing a ghost and nearly collapsed on the sidewalk. Once I got her to sit down at a nearby cafe and drink some water, she finally spoke. Her voice trembling, she asked me how I could possibly be sitting in front of her when she had attended my funeral 6 months ago. I laughed, thinking she was confused or joking, but the genuine fear and shock in her eyes told me otherwise. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and showed me something that turned my world upside down. A local newspaper article from our hometown reporting my tragic death in a climbing accident in Peru. According to the article, my body had been so badly damaged in the fall that it could not be transported back to the United States. There was even a quote from James expressing profound grief over losing his only brother. As if that was not horrifying enough, Sarah then told me that my grandparents had both passed away 3 months prior, just weeks apart from each other. James had apparently told everyone that the grief of losing me had been too much for them. I had missed their funerals because, according to everyone in my hometown, I was already dead. My mind reeled as I struggled to process this information. James had not only faked my death, but had somehow prevented me from knowing about our grandparents' passing. All those times I could not reach them directly suddenly made terrible sense. I felt physically ill, excusing myself to the bathroom, where I vomited until there was nothing left. When I returned to the table, Sarah helped me search online for more information. We found multiple articles about my death, about the grand funeral service James had organized, and about how the entire inheritance from our grandparents had gone to him as the sole surviving family member. There was even a piece about how James had established a photography scholarship in my memory. The calculated nature of his betrayal was staggering. He had used my own photographs from Peru as evidence of my final days. He had hired locals to serve as witnesses to my accident. He had even gone so far as to have a closed casket funeral, telling everyone that my body was too disfigured to be viewed. The shock gave way to a profound sense of loss. I had not been able to say goodbye to my grandparents, the two people who had raised and loved me unconditionally. I had missed their final days, their funerals, the chance to honor their memory properly, all because my brother, my own flesh and blood, had decided I was worth more to him dead than alive. I spent the night in Sarah's hostel room, alternating between stunned silence and uncontrollable sobs. She stayed with me, offering what comfort she could in the face of such a monumental betrayal. By morning, shock had given way to determination. I needed to get back home. I needed to reclaim my life and confront the brother who had stolen it from me. There were significant obstacles, however. James had apparently closed all my accounts. My passport would raise questions, since I was officially dead. I had very little cash on hand. But Sarah, proving herself a true friend, offered to loan me enough money for a flight back to the United States. She also helped me research legal options for someone in my bizarre situation. We discovered that faking someone's death and fraudulently claiming their inheritance was unsurprisingly highly illegal, but proving I was really me and not an imposter would be challenging. I would need documentation witnesses, possibly DNA tests. The legal battle ahead would be complex and lengthy. As I prepared to return home, I learned from social media that James was organizing a memorial service to mark the 2-year anniversary of my death. The timing seemed almost poetic. What better way to make my return than to walk into my own memorial service? The thought of James's face when he saw me gave me the first moment of grim satisfaction since this nightmare began. Before heading back to the United States, I needed allies. I could not simply walk back into town declaring I was alive without any support. After careful consideration, I decided to contact Frank Wilson, my grandparents' longtime attorney. If anyone would know the legal details of the inheritance and could help me navigate this mess, it would be him. Finding his contact information was easy enough. Convincing his secretary to put me through was another matter entirely. Eventually, I resorted to claiming I had information about Diego Martinez that Mr. Wilson would want to hear immediately. It worked, and soon I was on the phone with a very suspicious Frank Wilson. When I told him who I really was, he hung up. I called back immediately, and this time I shared details only the real Diego would know: the name of his first dog that had been buried in our grandparents' garden. The secret phrase our grandfather used to let us know ice cream was hidden in the vegetable drawer the time Frank had caught me and James sneaking cigars from his desk when we were teenagers. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, then a shaky voice asked if this was some kind of sick joke. I assured him it was not, and we arranged to meet at a hotel near the airport when I arrived back in the States. I asked him not to tell anyone about our conversation, explaining my suspicions about James. 2 days later, I sat across from Frank in a nondescript hotel room 20 miles from my hometown. The elderly attorney looked like he had aged a decade since I last saw him. When he walked in and saw me, he froze, his face draining of color. He approached slowly, reached out a trembling hand to touch my shoulder as if to verify I was solid, then pulled me into a tight embrace. Once we got past the shock of my resurrection, Frank filled me in on what had happened in my absence. As suspected, James had presented forged documents claiming I had died in a hiking accident in Peru. He had provided photographic evidence, witness statements, and official-looking death certificates. No one had questioned it. Following our grandparents' deaths, James had inherited everything as the sole surviving heir. Frank revealed that James had changed dramatically after my supposed death. He had become cold, calculating, focused solely on expanding his wealth. He had sold off half of the restaurant chain to a corporate buyer, using the money to fund a lavish lifestyle that our modest grandparents would have found appalling. Most disturbing of all, Frank revealed that James had started dating Lisa, my ex-girlfriend from college. She had been devastated by news of my death, and James had comforted her through her grief before their relationship turned romantic. The thought of them together, built on the lie of my death, made my stomach turn. With Frank's help, I began building my case. We contacted the FBI and local authorities, presenting evidence of my identity and James's fraud. My fingerprints were still on file from a security clearance I had obtained for a photography job at a government building years earlier. These matched, providing irrefutable proof that I was indeed Diego Martinez. The authorities advised keeping my return quiet until they could make their move against James. They wanted to catch him off guard, prevent him from hiding assets or fleeing. But I had my own plan. The memorial service was in 2 days, and I intended to make my grand entrance then. After some debate, the FBI agents agreed, seeing an opportunity to catch James in a public setting where he would be less likely to react violently. As the day approached, I struggled with conflicting emotions. There was anger, certainly a burning rage at the brother who had betrayed me so completely. But there was also a profound sadness. Whatever happened next, the brother I had grown up with, the person I thought I knew, was gone. Even if he had not actually killed me, he had destroyed our relationship beyond repair. The morning of the memorial service, I stood in a hotel room staring at my reflection. I had lost weight during my time in South America, and there were new lines around my eyes that spoke of hardship and disillusionment. But I was alive, and soon everyone would know it. Frank drove me to the community center where the service was being held. We parked a block away and waited for his signal. Through text updates from a trusted friend inside, we learned that James was currently giving a heartfelt speech about his beloved brother, whose life had been cut tragically short. The irony was not lost on me. When the moment came, I walked the short distance to the community center alone. FBI agents were positioned around the building dressed as mourners. I pushed open the double doors at the back of the main hall and stood there silently as heads began to turn. The reaction rippled through the crowd like a wave. Gasps, screams, people jumping to their feet, others frozen in shock. At the podium, James stopped mid-sentence, the color draining from his face as he looked up and saw me standing there. For a moment, our eyes locked across the room, and I saw something I never expected: raw fear. I will never forget that moment. As I walked slowly down the center aisle, people parting before me like I was some kind of apparition. Some reached out to touch me as if to convince themselves I was real. Others backed away, clearly terrified. Through it all, I kept my eyes fixed on James, who gripped the podium so tightly his knuckles turned white. When I finally stood at the front of the room, James attempted to regain his composure. He forced a smile and opened his arms as if to embrace me, playing the part of the overjoyed brother, reunited with a sibling he thought was dead. But I stepped back, and the words that came out of my mouth silenced the chaotic room. I told the truth, all of it, how James had orchestrated my fake death, how he had stolen my inheritance, how he had kept me from knowing about our grandparents' passing. I spoke clearly, calmly, laying out the facts of his betrayal for everyone to hear. James tried to interrupt, claiming I was an imposter, that grief had driven me insane, that this was all a misunderstanding. But the FBI agents chose that moment to move in surrounding him. They informed him he was under arrest for fraud, identity theft, insurance fraud, and a host of other charges. As they handcuffed him, James finally dropped the act. His face contorted with rage as he shouted that I had never deserved my share of the inheritance, that I had been our grandparents' favorite despite contributing nothing to the family legacy. His mask had fallen completely, revealing the jealousy and resentment that had apparently been festering for years. The crowd watched in stunned silence as James was led away. Among them, I spotted Lisa, my former girlfriend, looking like she might faint. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw her confusion and horror as she realized she had been sleeping with the man who had faked her ex-boyfriend's death. It was a small, petty victory in the grand scheme of things, but I would be lying if I said it did not give me some satisfaction. As the dust settled, people surrounded me with questions, tears, and apologies for believing I was dead. The local press had arrived, drawn by rumors of chaos at the memorial service. Cameras flashed as I stood there, the man who had returned from the grave to reclaim his life and expose his brother's betrayal. The headline practically wrote itself: "The Dead Return." The aftermath of my dramatic return was chaotic and exhausting. The legal system ground into motion slowly at first, and then with increasing momentum as the evidence against James mounted. My first challenge was officially declaring myself alive, which involved more paperwork than you might expect. The court system is surprisingly ill-equipped to handle the administrative resurrection of the legally deceased. James faced multiple serious charges: fraud, identity theft, forgery of official documents, insurance fraud, and grand larceny. The prosecution had an airtight case thanks to the meticulous trail of evidence James had left behind. He had been clever in creating my death, but sloppy in covering his financial tracks, apparently never considering the possibility that I might return to challenge his story. I visited James in jail once before his trial. I needed to hear from his own lips why he had done it. The man who sat across from me in the visitation room barely resembled my brother. His designer clothes had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit, his confident posture by slumped shoulders. Yet when he looked at me, there was still defiance in his eyes. He spoke without prompting, as if he had been waiting for the opportunity to explain himself. James claimed he had always lived in my shadow, that our grandparents had favored me despite his sacrifices for the family business. Every childhood competition, every parental compliment, every holiday gift had been tallied in his mind as evidence of inequity. In his twisted perspective, he had merely been balancing the scales of justice by taking what should have been his alone. What struck me most was his complete lack of remorse. He spoke about his actions as if they were reasonable, justified. The brother I thought I knew had never really existed. This revelation hurt more than any of his other betrayals. I left the visitation room knowing I would never return. The trial was mercifully brief. James pleaded not guilty despite the overwhelming evidence forcing me to testify about discovering my own death. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding him guilty on all counts. The judge, noting the calculated nature of the crimes and lack of remorse, sentenced him to 15 years in prison. Reclaiming my inheritance proved to be another complex battle. Half of the restaurant chain had already been sold, the money spent or hidden in offshore accounts that took investigators months to trace. The remaining restaurants had suffered under James's profit-focused management, losing the family atmosphere and quality that had made them special. The legal proceedings lasted nearly a year, during which I lived in a strange limbo. People in town did not know how to act around me. Some avoided me, entirely embarrassed by their role in my funeral or memorial service. Others seemed almost disappointed that I was not dead, as if my return had spoiled a perfectly good tragedy. A few true friends stood by me, helping me navigate this surreal chapter of my life. Rebuilding was a slow, painful process. I started with the restaurants, working with the staff who had known my grandparents to restore the original recipes and welcoming atmosphere. I used my photography to create beautiful images of the food and people, hanging them on the walls to tell the story of our family legacy. Financially, I recovered about 60% of my inheritance. The rest was gone, spent by James on luxury cars, a yacht, and extravagant travel. I found I did not care as much about the money as I had expected. What hurt more was the knowledge that he had sold family heirlooms, items of sentimental value that could never be replaced. The hardest part was grieving for my grandparents. Their graves stood side by side in the town cemetery, simple markers that spoke of their humble nature despite their success. I visited them weekly, bringing fresh flowers and spending hours telling them about my travels, my photographs, my plans for the future. Sometimes I imagined I could hear my grandmother's gentle laugh or feel my grandfather's firm hand on my shoulder. Gradually, I began to heal. I converted part of the flagship restaurant into a photography gallery showcasing my work alongside that of other local artists. I established a scholarship fund in my grandparents' name to help young culinary students and photographers pursue their passions. These actions helped me feel connected to them, honoring their memory in ways that felt authentic to who they were and what they valued. One unexpected bright spot emerged from this dark chapter. Andrea, a chef who had worked with my grandparents for years, became a close friend during the restoration of the restaurants. Her passion for food and unflinching support during my darkest days gradually blossomed into something more. Our first date was cooking dinner together in the restaurant kitchen, after hours recreating my grandmother's famous paella recipe. As months turned into years, the story of my death became less fascinating to the public. New scandals and curiosities took its place. I found myself grateful for the fading interest, for the opportunity to rebuild my life without constant scrutiny. I maintained my photography, finding that my experiences had deepened my work, giving it an emotional resonance it had previously lacked. James remains in prison, sending occasional letters that I leave unopened. Perhaps someday I will read them, but for now I am focused on moving forward rather than looking back. The betrayal taught me painful but valuable lessons about trust, about family, and about the unexpected turns life can take. When people ask if I have forgiven my brother, I tell them forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. Some days I feel nothing but anger when I think of him. Other days I find myself remembering the brother who taught me to ride a bike, who defended me against bullies, who held me when our parents died. Those memories make the betrayal all the more painful, but they also remind me that people are complex, rarely all good or all bad. The most profound lesson I learned through all of this is about the true nature of inheritance. What matters most is not the money or property we leave behind, but the values we pass on, the memories we create, the love we share. My grandparents left me far more than restaurants and bank accounts. They gave me resilience, creativity, and a deep appreciation for family that even James's betrayal could not destroy. Sometimes I think my supposed death taught me more about truly living than all my years before it. I no longer take for granted the simple joy of being recognized by old friends, of having my identity confirmed rather than questioned, of being able to visit the graves of loved ones. These ordinary experiences become precious when you have lost them even temporarily. The most valuable inheritance is not kept in vaults or bank accounts, but in how we choose to treat each other every day. What parts of your own legacy do you think matter most? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder about what truly matters in life. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes our greatest challenges can lead to our most meaningful transformations.